want to earn $1 million a year? Well, it's a skill. You've got to learn to fall in love and literally get off on making deals.
What is up, everybody? I have a special treat for you guys. I got a good friend of mine. This guy's got an amazing background for being in the entrepreneur world for just a few short years, like myself. This guy's been a part of over $3 million worth of high ticket sales, and now is the co-founder of a staffing agency called Prism. He's absolutely knocking out of the park. They focus on recruiting and training high ticket sales, or just salespeople in general, in all different fast growing markets. Welcome to the show, my friend. Thanks for coming on, Alex.
Yeah, of course. Pleasure to be here.
You've been crushing it not only personally. This is very interesting. This is what I think is super interesting about you. You've not only crushed it in the world of selling on your own, but you've then gone on to now training it and also having multiple, dozens, if not hundreds of individuals have seen massive success from your trainings in the sales world, which is honestly probably more impressive, because I love that, again, crushing it on your own is one thing, but then also helping hundreds of individuals also see multi-six-figure incomes and beyond is incredible. Thank you for coming on. And I would love to understand your story, kind of like how you started in the entrepreneur world to how you got here today on the staffing agency side.
Well, pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. And yeah, it's been a wild journey, because today, exactly, train sales teams, companies are doing $1 million plus a month, bring me in to train them. But I remember my first sales call like it was yesterday, and literally was so scared to make the offer. My hand was trembling and I was sweating. I was like, what do I do? And fortunately, the guy was already bought in, but he was just like, it's okay. You can close me. Just take my money. I think he wanted to help me my first sale, but I'll never forget that. Yeah, it's just been kind of a wild journey. I just had a mentor who told me pretty early on, basically, if you're going to find success, you need to learn sales. And so dropped out of college to pursue that, did some network marketing, did some panhandling, did some door-to-door, basically tried all these different types of sales until I stumbled into high ticket, really enjoyed it, got really good at it, then got really good at training other people on it. And then now today, essentially help and build sales teams. So at a high level, that's kind of background in the story.
Let's dive into two things before we dive into more of the sales aspect, because listen, my audience is real estate agents, commercial brokers most of the time, individuals who are kind of sometimes newer to the sales. And I talk a lot about cold calling. Just like you had the experience, like you were saying about the first phone call, we have a lot of individuals who come our way, who come listen to my content, and they see me cold calling and they're like, I could never do that. I'm curious, first off, your first sale, what was that? Was that high ticket sales or like coaching, or what was that?
Yeah, that was high ticket. That was my first high ticket sale. And yeah, it was for fitness coaching for entrepreneurs. So it was $3,000 for basically a coaching program on helping an entrepreneur get healthy.
How do you go from selling a $3,000 product to now over $3 million in high ticket sales? Because going from your first sale, which I feel like anyone can finally get over that hump, but going to 3 million is something obviously few and far between. So I'm curious, what's that differentiation?
I had done sales before that, but I honestly hated it. It was just like, I was like, is this really it? I'm not really sure. And there wasn't really much training out there back then. And so for me, I wanted to learn persuasion. I wanted to sell and obviously make really good money, but I wanted to sell something I really believed in, right? And like could actually change lives. And so for me, that was something in the high ticket and being like, oh, okay, this really helps people, right? In a big way. And obviously if you're selling a house or whatever it is, it's so much more than that, right? It's like not just that house, it's the people that are moving into it, what it's going to do for their family, all those things. But for me, I found something that worked finally. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. So I've just made a decision. I'm going to go all in learning sales, no matter what it takes. And basically grinded my face off to book calls, would get into Facebook Messenger, hit up these entrepreneurs, try and get them on the phone, and then would fail, and suck. And that being said, each call, I just looked at it and said, okay, what can I do to improve from the next call? Because the way I looked at it, right, is I was selling a $3,000 package. And, this can really apply for anyone listening to this, but it's like, if I have a sales call with someone, there's a potential that they could have bought. There's a reality where they did buy and they paid $3,000. So if they didn't buy, then that means I actually lost $3,000. Now, whatever your commission is, you can just calculate it for yourself, but that was the opportunity cost of the value of every sales call for me. So I was like, okay, if I don't close someone, there's a reason for it. And not knowing, the ignorance of not knowing that literally just cost me $3,000. So I'm going to hold whatever I take away from this call that I'm going to carry into the next, like gold, and implement it. And that was basically what I did. Is I would have a call, I'd review it, get better, take it into the next, And with that mindset, just sets after reps, eventually I found a really good way to sell that I found to be very effective, authentic, and not really salesy at all, just very natural, that had a very high close rate. And yeah, basically just got really good at generating deals, booking calls, and closing them, and just perfecting that process through trial and error until I just formulated my own system from it. And from there, it's just a rinsable and repeatable process. And that's now what I train other people on.
Awesome. So I'm going to dive into all of this, and I want to obviously unpack kind of what you talked about, just because like I want to try to translate this to the commercial real estate sales world. I love that you said that the first piece that really hit home for me, because I did feel like I did the same exact thing, which is you made the commitment. I'm going to become freaking great at this, which I feel like so many people go, I'm going to wing it. I'm going to try it. I'm going to give it my best shot. You know, like we hear this all the freaking time, right? But I feel like winners, people who are top in their class, those 1%ers in the sales world are like, I'm going to become the freaking best at this. I'm going to be number one. All right. There isn't another option. And they just commit to that greatness in that space. Right. So number one, fully agree with you. And I think that's a massive misconception that you can't just try it. Let me see how this goes. You have to just commit to it. And I'm going to make this thing work. That was one. Two, I love that you brought up distinctions of taking every call and learning from it. So powerful, dude. Like I just love, I know Tony Robbins talked about the 2 millimeter shift. I mean, it's the same kind of concept, right? It's just every phone call. What can I learn? How can I slightly improve? So that's what I want to talk about first, which is for an agent who's making calls. I mean, these are people who own millions of dollars worth of real estate most of the time, if not tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. When you're calling, the same kind of concept for a high ticket sales, when you're trying to sell, a large package to a, very qualified individual. I'm curious, like, what are like maybe 2 or 3 points that you can kind of just be paying attention to so you can improve? Like, what is that?
In the context of cold calling, or just in general?
Yeah, I mean, like, listen, like if you just know like the first 3 points, like when you're on a phone call, what are those few pieces that you can be paying attention to improve on that you see like most commonly?
So I look at it like, what are the stages of the call, right? So if you are making calls or you're having a sales call, you've got to know where you're taking people if you're going to take them anywhere. So obviously we want to book a next call or close them or whatever it is. So the question is, what are your steps between intro of the call all the way to where you want to lead them? And if you don't know those steps, then you're essentially winging it each time, and you don't actually know what's working or what's not. So the first step really is to define the steps. So that way you have a hypothesis of saying, okay, if I call someone that has $10 billion in real estate and I run them through this process, I'm going to get a call. And so you got to have a system to start with that you're testing. And then you start working that system and you go, oh, I'm not even getting past the first step. That means the first step doesn't work, aka how you're introing the call. If you found, wow, I need to come in with sharp energy, say this exact line, and then they'll move to the next step. Okay, bingo, you've got the first step. And now you can kind of build from there until eventually, okay, if I do this exact thing with this exact way, that's how it works. And like key things you can look for is language, right? So specifically the words that you're choosing. People think, oh, I can just say whatever and like, as long as I'm in good energy. It's like the language, there's been so many tests around this. The exact word choice that you use, so important. You can say, hey, I'm looking to buy some of your real estate. Okay, that's general. Or you could say, hey, I see you've been sitting on this property for the last 6 months and it's probably a pain in your ass and you're not quite sure what to do with it. Let me make your day better. If that was a pain point for that person, that's going to be much more compelling. So language, tonality, and then the steps of basically the call.
So let's break these pieces down, right? Because I bring up bottlenecks a lot. Like during my coaching, I always talk about bottlenecks, right? Like similar to what you're talking about. It's like you got steps, and it's like it's really hard to know. Like when you're coaching somebody, it's like, okay, well, I can't just say like all of this is broken because that's probably not. Like you probably have one piece, one kink in your hose that's causing you to not sell as much people as you probably should, because there's like a piece in the business. Before we move on to the next one, in that specifics for the steps, right? I know you said intro. Where do you feel like most people's kink in their hoses on a sales call?
I think for people listening here, if I had to imagine, right, you're making your first call or whatever it is, it's somewhere in between building rapport and transitioning to connecting with them. I find the majority of sales reps have been taught that rapport is like, oh, wow, your dog and the geese in the sky and like just random shit that like you don't even really care about as a sales rep. Like you literally don't care at all. That actually comes across as inauthentic and you trying to sell them, which is the very thing you don't want. Whereas like if you just built rapport on things you did care about or were natural, that would feel much more congruent and they're going to trust you more when it comes time to your pitch. So I would say that's probably number one is like too much rapport. And then number two would be objection handling.
Do you mind if you define the steps for the people listening?
Sure. Yeah. Like it's the steps of a call per se.
Yeah. I'm curious just to have your steps of a call here.
Number one, I would say connect. Number 2 would be qualify. And then number 3 would be invite. And this is for like a cold call. If you're just making an outbound call, I would say that is the stage of the call. So you connect, you qualify, you invite. Connect is you connect with them. And, you know, I haven't really studied too many sales trainers. A lot of this has come from my own personal experience and just, like I said, learning what works, what doesn't. But I have gone out there and taken some of the best, left the rest. And one thing that Jordan Belfort talks about that I really like is the first 4 seconds. First 4 seconds, someone's subconscious literally determines that quickly, are you a threat or should I trust you? Well, I think a lot of people, when they're making calls, they're just like bored because they don't know if they're going to answer or not. There's in this passive energy and, you know, they're just making their dials. Well, once that person answers and you're in this like not sharp energy and you on the call and you're like, oh, hey, is this so-and-so you stumbled? Lost.
This guy, Jeremy Miner, which I think his work is awesome. He's got a lot of unbelievable context that I really do enjoy. However, I feel like he brings up the beginning part of it where like you should kind of stumble over your words on purpose so it sounds more natural, right? Versus being like, because I think he's trying to go against Jordan Belfort, like where it's like very, or Grant Cardone, who talked about being very, very sharp and confident on your first line. I believe in being sharp and confident. I think it gets way better results. It sounds like you feel the same.
I completely agree. People need certainty and they are essentially asking themselves, can I trust this person? Where does trust come from? They're asking, will this person lead me to the end transformation that I'm trying to create? If you're uncertain, who's going to lead an uncertain person to the promised land?
Yeah, I just feel like Nobody. It's just two uncertain people, you know, having a really weird conversation.
Exactly. Exactly. So I would say first impressions, everything. Do you want to leave an uncertain or certain impression? I would say certain.
So I have intro, which is the first 4 seconds. I'm kind of breaking that piece off. And then you go connect, qualify, invite. So in the commercial world, right, in the commercial real estate world, the first 4 seconds, I agree with you 100%. I think is so freaking crucial, which is why we talk about our script book. We have a script book down in the description below. You know, you can all download that for free. But I believe it's important, like we just talked about, being so freaking confident about your first line and knowing exactly what you're going to say, being so confident, like, you know, like there's not that wondering of like, it kind of John, is this John? Like when you're really not confident, I agree with you. Like we were kind of connecting on that point, knowing that line like the back of your freaking hand. I heard you should know your script. Like if someone had a gun to your head, you should be able to recite your freaking sales script. Like that's good enough, right? Like you can recite your phone number, your social security number, your address or whatever that well. Then, okay, let's talk. You were talking about the rapport connection phase where you feel like kind of people are messing up. Talk to me about the biggest mistakes in this phase.
You got to know who your audience is, right? If you are selling to a high profile individual, you have to put yourself in their shoes. Why would they buy from you? Well, high profile people, right? It's usually people who have a lot of time, don't have money. And people who have a lot of money usually don't have time. And obviously there's uber successful people who have plenty of time and plenty of money, but that's the third stage. So most people, they have money, they don't have time, meaning that they're not here to waste their time and talk about nonsense. So, you know, if you're talking to a more less established person and that's your audience, amazing. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You just got to be aware of who you're speaking to. And so, for example, for myself, I've sold to a lot of different kinds of people over my career. Now we're working with companies, owners, CEOs, founders who are doing $1 million, $2 million, $3 million a month. And when I get on the phone with them, like I was just on the phone with the guy earlier, this man, sharp, get to the point. Don't waste my fucking time. Tell me your offer, how it works, da-da-da. And then, you know, he's like coming at me with that energy. And if I am not clear that I'm talking to a high profile person, they're not going to respect me because they're like, oh, this person isn't even aware of who they're talking to. And it's not from a significance standpoint. It's understanding that you got to know your audience and cater to how they like to buy. So if you're speaking to a high profile person in the connection stage, you can connect and get into it, but a lot of them just want to get down to business, you know? So you trying to talk about their kid or their dog or what'd you do last weekend? They don't care. They're just asking, what do you want from me? If you try and talk about that stuff, it'll actually break rapport. So connecting isn't like, hey, let me talk about nonsense. Rapport is an understanding that we're on the same page and we have a clear intention. So that's really the first step to creating rapport or connection is when you get in the call, you come in sharp, you do your one-liner, And then you set an intention, you know, hey, the reason I'm calling is I'm interested in your property on XYZ place and I would like to buy it, or I'd like to connect with an investor and I'd like to do whatever. They're like, oh, okay, sounds great. Now we know what the call is about. Now we've connected. Now we can move into qualifying, right? We can ask specific qualifying questions, but you got to get on the same page first. It's like, why are we here? Okay, this is why we're here. Amazing. Now we can move into it.
My opening line, and we're going to talk about cold calling in a second, because I think this is going to be a huge topic that we can kind of rip on, maybe even debate a little bit. This is why like my sales scripts are so direct, so to the point, because I know these individuals don't have any time to waste, right? And especially if this is for specifically cold call prospecting, I'm getting straight to the point. Like I want to know, within the first 10, 20 seconds, is it a yay or nay? Are we doing business? Like this way they can get off the phone and I can get off the phone. This is good for them and good for me. Where some people are trying to beat it around the bush and be like, hey, like, let me try to skirt around and like try to, ask you some other BS questions before I ask you if you consider selling. They want to know right away why the heck you're calling. I love that you brought that up. And then in regards to the connection and rapport piece, listen, if you're talking to somebody who's got a lot of money in no time, which is incredibly consistent with a large percentage of the individuals we prospect. So freaking true. Like so many people are like, this is why you have to be so dialed in with your scripts. Like, because they're like, I don't know what to say next. And like, maybe they say that they're open to selling the property. So can you they're just not prepared for it. And it's like, you got to be fast. You got to be sharp. You got to know your script. And it'll really help you with the rapport building. So let's talk about this, because you've been in the high ticket sales world and now in the, really just sales in general. I'm curious, cold calling. I am a huge fan of it. Been doing it my whole life. Over 1 million cold calls in my career. It's built my entire career off of that. And we do a lot of it today. When you're talking to a new salesperson, and we're talking to a bunch of newer salespeople right now, or even some of those people who've been in the business 10, 20, 30 years and are like, I don't know if I want to do cold calling. I'm not about it. What is your take on cold calling? Or are you more of a, sphere of influence guy?
Cold calling is a great tool. 100%. I mean, at the end of the day, it's very controllable. So you know your numbers. If I make 500 calls, I will book 5 appointments. And there's not many things that have that exact number for a replicatable system when it comes to sales. Like, we can go beyond that and say marketing and stuff. But from a sales standpoint, cold calling, I am a big fan of for sure.
Is cold calling, like, especially when you're talking to a new salesperson, is that your favorite? Is that your thing? Is that your go-to thing? Or are you typically like, let's teach them this first and then we can talk about that?
I think it depends on your niche, your industry, and where your buyers are. So usually what I teach is you want to have kind of a garden approach, and then like a hunting approach, like spears and farming. So farming is having an online presence, and older people will go, oh, I don't need that. Well, younger people will be like, oh, social media I don't show up on there. I don't need that for my business. You're all wrong, because at the end of the day, when you prospect someone, let's say you do cold call them or you find a lead somehow, some way, they're still asking themselves, should I trust this person? If they look you up online and they see you partying from college, or they don't see anything at all, there's no reference to their search that you're relevant in any way, a real person that can help them solve their problems, you just shot yourself in the foot. So why would you not make it easier to sell and essentially amplify all of your prospecting efforts? What I suggest is get a Facebook at the very least, or an Instagram or a LinkedIn page, really whatever is most relevant for your audience, but build an online presence that makes you look like a real person that's credible, that can solve the problem, where when they come across your page, they think to themselves, I trust this guy. I trust this gal. She can help me reach my goals. Here's clients that she's worked with. Here's, key things she teaches. So I would say get that in place and then start all your outbound efforts, and you'll find a higher ROI on those efforts.
To unpack that, it's like, okay, so you got the farming piece, which is, I feel like farming is kind of like multifaceted, right? Like I agree that social media is a huge aspect. I feel like if you're not on social, you're not anywhere. Like you just don't exist. Your business does not exist. But it's also having the longevity mindset. Like, hey, like you're going to start doing this every day, and it's not going to be anything for 5 or 10 years, but it's a necessity, right? It's like you can't just neglect your grass outside if you have a house, right? Like you got to make sure you're watering it, and like whether it's there or not, like you got to do what you got to do. And then the other piece of it is also the networking and relationship piece of the farming, where it's like you're not going to get infinite referrals tomorrow because you build a connection with somebody, but it's like you still have to continuously expand your network. So eventually one day you don't have to continuously make cold calls. Do you have a minimum standard for salespeople? Like when you're talking to them, do you have like a minimum like amount of reach outs? Like I am such a fanatic about making your calls every day, a few hours a day. I can get down to the nitty gritty in a little bit, but do you have a minimum standard for your salespeople?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely numbers for sure, whether it's number of outreaches sent, cold emails sent, phone calls made, posts on social. Yes, definitely indicators for sure.
And the reason why I want to bring this up is because I feel like so many people are, they number one, they're not committed. Like the first part that we talked about, right? They're just not committed to the game. In turn, because they're not that committed, and even if they are a little bit committed, they're not doing the effort levels necessary in order to see massive success. I don't care if they're making cold calls or text messages or cold emails or DMs or reach out to their sphere of influence. It's like they're doing 3 a day. It's like to be a multi-6-figure earner. It's like I feel like people are just so mentally skewed on their mindset of what it takes in order to make a multi-6-figure, if not 7+ figure income on an annual basis. Nonetheless, monthly. I'm curious, like where do you like for your top into like, okay, we're talking like top class 1% of 1%ers on the sales world. Do you have like a mental benchmark of what a minimum standard should be?
I would say, well, again, it depends on the channel and, the offer and the revenue and all of that. But the answer is as many as possible, right?
I agree.
And I know that's generic, but if you really think about it, Michael Jordan, for example, if he loved basketball, right? He's like, oh my God, I love this sport. I want to become really good at it. Okay, well, if Michael Jordan only practiced an hour a day or 2 hours a day, he's not going to get good enough fast enough in order to reach his goal. And that's kind of like the same thing here. It's like if you want to earn $1 million a year, you want to earn 6 figures a year in sales, well, it's a skill, right? And you've got to learn to fall in love and literally get off on making deals, right? Where it's like when I sign a deal, I'm like, yes, like we did it. And there was objections, there were obstacles, there were things that came up, and like being able to like fall in love with the game is so freaking powerful. And it starts with committing, like you talked about. And in my experience, literally doing the grunt work that no one wants to do. Why does 1% of real estate agents make over 6 figures? Because 1% understand exactly what I'm sharing with you. They fall in love with it and they realize that the grunt work, the thing no one wants to do, is actually the work that makes everything else work. Because your ability to show up consistently every day and make 500 calls, for example, gives you the mindset and the discipline and the character to close, right? You want to close a deal. People are like, oh, I want to be a closer. I just want to have deals. Well, anyone can close the 2 to 3% of sales that are always hot, ready to buy, but it takes skill to actually close the remaining 40 to 50% that are open but need to be enrolled, right? And that skill set comes and cultivated really from that first part of doing the direct outreaches or doing the cold calls or whatever heavy lifting that's quote unquote uncomfortable. That's what makes you great at sales. And if you build that skill set, like I spent 3 months door knocking. I literally lived in my car at one point, and when I was on the street panhandling perfume to strangers on the street for 40 to 50 bucks that was made $3 in China, and like just hustling, making plays, all of that direct translate to now being able to close obviously much larger deals, but that skill set really came from the beginning.
So powerful, man. Let's talk about specific pointers. Somebody is in sales right now, commercial real estate sales as an example, and they're like, I want to, because I'm going to pin this back. I know you said languaging and scripting and tonality. Besides the languaging and tonality, which I think is so freaking powerful, I agree. What is something that you're working on with somebody who's already, maybe you can talk about both sides of the coin, somebody who's like newer, but like, again, even someone who's already doing the business, right? Doing sales, right? They're making 100 a year and they're like, man, like I want to improve. I want to make more. What are some, tips or pointers you can be giving people in those situations?
Yeah, for sure. Well, number one is I would say get mentorship, get around people who are making really good money. It's a frequency, it's a mindset to make that kind of money. And so, when I was starting out, I was living with my mom and my sister and love them, but like they never made serious money before. And so I remember my first sales job, this guy was used to making a lot of money. And being around him was so uncomfortable every day, uncomfortable. But I just raised my mindset so much, so quickly that literally 10K a month was like, duh, like that should be an absolute minimum. Like that's nothing. Like, of course, get around people. I would say number one, that are making money. If you can, invest in mentorship if you need to, like whatever you can to learn how to get that kind of mindset. I would get the mindset around money straight, number one. And then number two is really knowing your numbers and having compelling reasons. Why are you committed? and waking up every day, because it will take work. There will be challenges, but your ability to influence others is in direct proportion to your ability to influence yourself. If you're going to influence X amount of people to make 100K, for example, or take it to 1 million, then you have to influence yourself to that same extent. And that means showing up consistently every day and having enough compelling reasons for that. So get really clear on your reasons, really clear on your numbers, and then essentially have a process that you work that you can look at and say what's working, what's not, and improve it until it's just well-oiled machine. And then you just do that day in and day out. And that would be my recommendation.
So is there in your mind the differentiator between a 5 or 10 percenter and a 1 percenter? Because you've trained them both, right? You've seen them, you know, you've dealt with them on a very regular basis. What's the main differentiators that you've seen between maybe a 50K to 100K guy versus a million plus?
I just got this message from a closer that I was working with about 2 months ago. And when I joined this team was doing 1 million a month within 30 days, literally doing nothing else other than training their reps. We took them to 1.4 million, basically increasing the close rate of all the closers. And in that process, I got like familiar with all the reps. There was about 12 of them. But there's this one lady, and I was like, she's the one. She's the one to break 300K a month. And that was my goal, was to find someone who would break 300K a month. And so I started working with them for about 3 months, and no one had hit it, but I knew she was the one. Sure enough, a month later, she messages me 350K in revenue in a single month, which for that role in that team, unheard of, broke company records, the whole thing. The thing about this woman has an accent. So most people would say, we're not going to hire her. She's terrible. You can't even hear her. This woman has a thick European accent, top producer, middle-aged woman. You would think, oh, she's not young, hungry. She can't get after it. There's other people that can work harder than her. Overall, just very unassuming. Not hard closey at all. Why do I share that? Because I think she's an example of someone that has what the 1 percenters do, that is not surface level things. It is a proactivity. That woman thinks for herself, right? She's not like, oh, no one gave me a script. Oh, no one told me to not reach out and make my 500 calls. Oh, no one held me accountable to making my 500 calls. She just does it. You don't have to tell. You tell her once, hey, make these 500 calls for 50 days in a row. Done. When she shows up to our coaching calls, she comes prepared with a list of questions. She's like, hey, Riker, here's what I want to cover today. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. For her calls, she reviews them. You know how many sales reps I say, hey, just review your calls, look at what worked, look at what didn't, look at what can be improved, and improve it. She's the only one that did it. Out of all 12 of those reps, she was the only one that did it. I would say, what do those 1 percenters have? It is a level of proactivity. They have learned how to be proactive, to drive revenue, to think for themselves. And because of that, her and I were able to have conversations that I'm not able to with 99% of reps about very advanced sales concepts, 25 cognitive biases and like things like that I could only talk with her. It's a love for the game, wanting to fall in love and learn it, and just being proactive and getting after it each day.
I am so happy you brought up this as an example, because I cannot tell you how many individuals come to me and they're like, well, which obviously environment's important, which obviously having accountability is important, which obviously I'd recommend having a coach, and obviously I'd recommend, working your tail off. But like, that is such a perfect example of like, it isn't anything to do with surface level anything. 100%. Anybody who wants it bad enough, who's proactive enough to make the adjustments and willing to make the adjustments, and on a daily basis making those 2 millimeter shifts and working her freaking tail off, can create a massive amount of wealth in a short period of time, given all things being the same. Curious though, I heard you bring up mindset. You brought it up a few times. What is the mindset, or is there any pieces of mindset which you can relate back to the story, even if there's anything? But what do you feel like is like key pieces in the mindset game that need to be in check in order to be a top producer?
There's a good saying where in the space that I'm in, is the objection that you can't overcome is the objection you haven't overcome yourself. Your ability to influence others is in direct proportion to your ability to influence yourself. So when we look at sales, what is it? It's persuasion. In persuasion, what you say, how you say it, all of that matters. But humans are so much more than just, this surface level interaction. Our bodies have been hardwired after many, many years to intuitively know, should I trust this person or not? And so who you are speaks so loudly, I cannot hear the words you say, right? There's a quote from Thoreau. And often when I talk about this, people check out like, oh, it's not some, fancy tactical script. Well, this is why you're broke, right? Is because you don't understand how this game works on a deeper level. It's like an iceberg, right? You can have the script, you can have the things on top, but underneath it is how you're showing up every day, who you are, the actions and decisions that you make. So I would say that the mindset of becoming great at sales is really a matter of living in congruence with your own vision for your life. Because essentially every day you're making promises, you're using your word to that people either believe or they don't, right? So you make a promise, hey, we're going to sell this, you're going to get this house, you're going to get this thing, whatever you're selling, you're making a promise. And then fulfillment is delivering on that. You make a promise, and then you fulfill on it. That's business in a nutshell. In your life, if you're telling yourself, today I wake up at 6 a.m. and I'm going to the gym, you make a promise, you use your word, you say, I'm going to do this, and then you don't, what does that tell your subconscious? I'm not trustworthy. My word doesn't mean anything. If I say I'm going to do something and I don't, then I actually am not to be trusted. Subconsciously, that's literally what your own self-talk says, whether you're aware of it or not. So then here you are on a conversation with a prospect and you're making a promise. But subconsciously, you don't actually believe that that's going to happen because in your own life, you are not keeping your promises. So how the hell do you expect this person to believe that you're going to keep your promise to them if you can't even keep your promise to yourself? You can't. And so how does that show up? The prospect goes, I need to think about it. I don't know if I have the money right now. I need to talk to my spouse. Why? Because they can feel what you're saying underneath what you're saying. And it's not what you're saying, it's who you are, right? That's where you can take two sales reps with the same script and get two completely different outcomes. I would say the mindset piece is really being able to come home to what do you want for your life in health, wealth, and relationships, and having a plan for that, and then working towards it each day. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have a six-pack. You don't need to have some Instagram model. You don't need to be making $10 billion to be loved or any of those things. Life's a forever game. You work towards them. And if you're moving towards them in that direction, your subconscious feels confident. Your subconscious goes, when I make promises, I keep them. And no one's perfect, but more often than not, if you can do those things, you will trust yourself. And as a byproduct, you'll be someone worth trusting. And then when you speak, people listen and you make promises and you don't really get objections.
Drop the mic, man. Drop the mic. Ooh, very well said. I think that it's so much more than people realize. That it's like, I said the same thing before, which is like, again, you have two salespeople saying the same thing. What's the differentiator, right? It's like, it's the individual and how, how they are and their character and their values, right? Like who they intrinsically are, that makes the difference. Really well said, man. I think that, and again, anyone who is really looking to improve on their sales ability needs to take what you just said very, very seriously. But just take a moment and take a look in the mirror. Assess what you see. Assess how you feel looking at yourself in the mirror. Like, are you proud to be who you are and the way that you act, the way that the values that you have? Like, that is going to translate into a better result in business and in life when you can start keeping your word to yourself, when you can start improving upon the way that you think, the way that you act in accordance, which is super powerful. Okay, I want to do one last thing with you, my friend. Before we leave our amazing audience in a few minutes, what do you feel like is one piece of advice if you were, you're talking to a younger version of you, just getting started. You only had like maybe 2 minutes with them, and you can give one piece of advice. What would you say?
In general, in the context of sales,
You can do both. Do one each.
I'll do sales. I would say just find something that like you really enjoy and believe in, and just commit to getting really good at selling that thing. You will do well. You'll never have to worry about money again.
So Alex, thank you so much for being on today. I appreciate you so much. How can my audience find you? How can they support you?
If you guys want to connect, jam on other sales stuff, or if you're interested in sales coaching, feel free to reach out. You can find me on Instagram, Alexander Riker, Facebook, same thing, Alexander Riker, and just, follow me and shoot me a DM.
Listen, man, I appreciate you so much. This was wonderful. Thank you for being on. And again, for those of you who have been still watching us today, make sure you check out Alex's content. He's a freaking rock star. Appreciate you a lot, guys, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, everyone.